not say that that is a bad idea.
Thank you, Mayor. I also have been looking at this this allocation for the fire truck replacement, and I'm still on the horns of a dilemma, so to speak, in that, as you heard in the special session, they're able to slip in a bill in the tax bill where basically providing ambulance service to the corrections, the work farm, is going to have to be at the Medicare replacement cost, which we've estimated is $100,000 impact on our ambulance fund. And so one of the things that I want to develop further is if indeed that is another $100,000 hit to our ambulance fund, we may have to take a look at the fire truck replacement fund just in order to keep a balance to cover those additional costs. Now, these are not final decisions, but as we work through the coming up to what the final maximum levy is in September, we can cut back as we go further along in the year. But again, I know Chief Lucan has been working on that and trying to come up with a mechanism or a way where perhaps the county would be able to provide additional funds for the ambulance service to the work farm. And at this point, I don't believe we have any recommendations that we can give. But again, as we look at these items, there may be some need to do some switching, or as John mentioned, we may have to curtail the full amount that we set aside for some of these other programs. And understand, you know, we're not trying to rearrange the deck furniture on the Titanic. You know, we're trying to operate you know, the city in a fiscally prudent manner, and this. I hear what the mayor is saying, and we may want to, you know, peel back or defer some of these items. One of the things I'm exploring, and the mayor so aptly put it, is that some of these items need to be on a referendum by our citizens. And as some of you may know, I've been exploring the legislature changed the rules for the local option sales tax this last session. And so I've been exploring this probably in my final tenure as a public servant before I get hung. But I think that has a lot of merit in that some of these tremendous expenses that the city of Maplewood endures, and we're placing it on our property taxpayers, should be perhaps shared by a larger group of people. And that group would be a local option sales tax to help pay for some of these impacts. I'm not at this point ready to bring that out, but I am studying it, and so that I don't want you to think that we're just sitting back on our laurels saying, you know, let's just, you know, tax the property taxpayer to the limit. We understand there is a recession. We understand that times are tough, but we also need to provide leadership for the future, and we just can't be afraid of what's happened in the past. We have to have the vision to think that, hope that better days are coming.
Jim?
I'll be brief because Mr. All said that he was going to be brief, so I don't want to keep him from his brevity. But I think one of the things that this is a really good conversation, because I do think that there is a component to the conversation that does become very personal. And I think, as Councilman Juniman said, she's one who aptly feels in her personal home the significance of any change in the tax levy as a taxpayer in Maplewood, as do all of us. And I think one of the things that we're delicately balancing is, if we defer it today, how much will it cost us tomorrow, right? I mean, if we put this off today, I guarantee you next year when we have these conversations, it's not going to be 100,000, it's going to be 140,000, and so on. And so to not say to Chief Lucan or Chief Tamala that the dollars that they've already cut from their budgets, and as Mr. Nephew aptly pointed out, operating at a less staff rate, what will those fire trucks cost us, down the road, or the additional staffing or the additional renovations? And so it's a very precarious balancing act, and I am not in any way, and I don't think anybody was saying it up here, that every department head, when they came before us, said, we're fat, we have a bunch of, money in the closet, and we just don't even know what to do with it anymore, I heard everybody saying we're making some painful decisions that also impact people in the department and their families. And so one of the things that I'm curious to hear about is, and I think the mayor is spot on this one, this is the hardest one, what can we absolutely live without? What can we absolutely live without? And I would be very much in favor of being at, the minimum increase in the levy, meeting the expectations and the needs of the city as a whole, not the city as a department or entity. And I'm not sure that we're there just yet, but we're getting darn close.
Mayor and Council, if we can go back to the overhead, we'll throw that in. Certainly, if you're looking for staff, this is one of the areas that if you don't put a full 100,000 in, I think we understand that, and that would be an area, as Chief Lucan mentioned. We certainly can probably get by with less because we have longer time to plan for this area. I'll hit some other ones in the future that we probably can get by with. This is a new item. Certainly, it's a future item. As the mayor said, as you as a council, if you don't want to do this, start setting aside money. That's certainly understandable. It's not needed until 2013 at the earliest. I do know that council, we're not that far as staff away from where you are. On September 26th on the work session, we're likely to be, we're planning anyway, to talk about all these capital projects. How does the funding work? How does it go? Because there are a lot of unanswered questions. You've not given us a staff direction. We certainly don't know where you want to go. Therefore, we put this budget together based upon what we see as an understanding of your needs. Also, the 2013 to 2017 capital improvements plan, we have a lot of items, and we're going to start that a little bit earlier. Typically, we start in February. We're going to start in October because we need to start talking about that police department expansion, and you as a council need to start making those decisions. And how does the East Metro Public Safety Facility enter into that? And so what are those capital plans, those 5 years? So we're talking now to 2017. And so we're going to crank up the staff and get working 4 to 5 months earlier than normal, and try to get you some of those answers. So I think we're all on the same page from that standpoint. As I move along and try to go quicker, here we go. In our budget reserves, now we're going to talk general fund and areas where we are. On April 11th, you approved a fund balance increase up to 38.5%. That was a $356,000 decision. That's your 2% right there. And so for 2012, we're suggesting adding $100,000. And if you read my wording in there, if you didn't read the words conservative estimate in there once or twice, you might see that this is a number. And council, this is a difficult number for us. Last year, as you said, we ended 2010 with nearly $800,000 of reserves money. What we're assuming here is that we will not have reserve monies when we end this year. Right now, things look reasonably good, but we really won't know that till October or November. But this is very, very conservative. It's simply the holding category for how we're going to end the year and where we're going to go. If you want to give direction and tell us to not put this in the budget, it's certainly one of the areas if you're looking for an item, to possibly say, make sure you come back in at 38.5%, but, as I click through here quickly, end the year with money in there so we can do that. That's something that we can plan accordingly, but it's assuming where we are. Mayor and council, last year when we talked about this item, we talked about $122,000 in a contingency category, and that was one of the areas you debated as a council whether to do that or not. We're not doing that this year. This is this item, and we simply, last year, ended with $800,000. I'm going to move on, but that was a clue as to conservative estimate. You also could consider, you have $75,000 in the legal contingency fund. You could consider that that money is available should you need it at some point in the future. It acts just as your reserve. So, again, you could choose that and say, well, let's keep the money in the legal contingency fund, but count it towards our reserves, and therefore you could use that money accordingly. I'll move on. I think as soon as I'll get my clicker there. Well, we're talking about $126,000 for health care. Again, an item that I wish I had some better news for you. We've run this fund, the Employee Benefits Fund, had $127,000 to the good at the end of '08. It was $61,000 in the hole at the end of '09, and it was $447,000 in the hole in '10. However, we implemented a number of early retirements and mandatory leave. And so we went into it and knew that rather than pay for that in a one-year period, we decided we'd pay for it in a 5-year period. So with some rough, very rough estimates, we don't know, we're decreasing that fund down to $380,000 likely at the end of this year. We won't know for sure. And with this proposal, getting it down to $300,000. And again, this is a up and down fund balance. Really what the biggest risk factor in here is our health care and our health care costs as a city for the employees. We pay Medica for health care over $2 million a year for health care for the employees. 15% increase is a possibility. We don't think it's in that category, but of the 15%, 80% of that through our bargaining contracts is for the employees. And this is where I wish I had better news. This is very, very disappointing. We thought our wellness program would have a positive impact. Certainly it's a long-range impact, but the companies would give us up to 6% discounts. Instead of that 15%, it could be 9%, but only 34% of our employees. We're not moving forward very well with our wellness plan. We've got a lot of work to do. It's unfortunately going to have to become a collective bargaining issue. Because, Council, $126,000 is about what the 1% raise that's in the contracts right now. And so, again, this is very, very, for me, disheartening. I'd hoped for better news to tell you, but this is one area that I can't recommend that you decrease very much at this point in time, just because the news is not that good. We've had some large claims for some employees, but our participation rate went down this second trimester, and so we're going to have to make some significant changes in that category. Moving on, general operating expenses. I'm going to go through these quickly. Citizen services, again, as Gail talked about, we gave reduced levels, and some of the departments, we told the departments to come in with your request, but you have to identify cuts to come at the levels. Citizen services said we will live at that level as directed rather than any additional requests. So no further reductions in that. Community development, we talked about, I presented the reductions in that area. We're going to reassign Nick Carver, our assistant building official, to do some of the work that Sean's doing because Bill Prefer's retiring, so Sean's going to shift over there. We're going to shift some people around and do less work. Certainly our building officials will be down 20% of a person with that shift. We also have some other staffing revisions in community development and that we're going to have to do with some of the personnel in that area with some additional revisions. Our executive department, that's the city manager, HR. We're talking about Mr. Bethel and reducing the amount of time he's available to help us in our HR area. Our finance department came in at the recommended level, so we're making no further reductions in that category. There it is, the fire department, and I want to talk about this. Certainly with all the math, I don't want to joke at all about this at all. Council, the fire department is going to be reducing expenditures. So if all that wording in there comes out and all the numbers that you put together, the Chief Lucan is going to have less money to use and will be reducing expenditures in the fire department next year under this plan. We originally recommended $114,000, but due to the numbers that we came out, we reduced that by $28,000. But we're assuming new levy revenue of $350,000 to the fire department. So again, because of that, that goes back to that ambulance fund being so far in the red. We're talking about bringing in new money and cutting expenses. And so,
Question.
Okay.
The chief has talked to me about this before, but I've come up with some new questions having to do with the ambulance service. And so it's always put out that the license, or what's the proper term for what allows us to operate the ambulance service?
Mayor, what we have is it is a license. We have the license to operate an ALS ambulance within our city, which what that really does is it gives us the opportunities to determine what and how we operate it. No one else could come into our community and offer ambulance service to anyone else because we own the license. It's called the PSA for it. And so...
Who do we get the license from?
Pardon me?
Who do we get the license from?
Oh, that goes back probably, I want to say maybe a total of 20 years ago. What was happening is that every ambulance company was going into every city. I hate to say this, but somewhat in the extent of your garbage hauling in some extents, and people were going in, it was becoming an issue. So the state went out and said that we are going to offer anyone who would like a license to operate in an area. At that time, if you remember, back in 1977, the city of Maplewood started its paramedic program. So we had an actual paramedic program here, so the license was offered to us. And so we accepted it. At the same time, there was two actual licenses that were available. One was to do the 911 transports, which is what we accepted. The other license that was available was the one to do inter-hospital transports or facility transports. In other words, if someone needed to go non-emergency from a healthcare facility to a doctor's office or a healthcare facility to a hospital on a non-emergency basis, we did not take that license. So at this time, Health East, Alliance, and others can come in and do that type of transport. Now, I didn't mean to digress, but the bottom line is that we then are in turn of who and how we can do that. If we so choose not to provide our own ambulance service, at that point then we still hold our PSA, and then we can go out to others and have them operate the service for us. Like some cities who do not do that. For instance, let's take Roseville. Roseville does not own their license or PSA. It's owned by Alina. And so for all practical purposes, they have no say-so in how that ambulance service operates within their city.
Okay, so I think I just heard something that I at least am understanding differently than in past conversations. So we can maintain the license but subcontract out the work?
That's correct.
So that we would be able to list the parameters of a service level that we would want.
That is correct.
Okay. It seems to me that it's an anchor pulling us way to the bottom of the ocean, and so.
Well, Mayor, if I can too, and as you and I have talked, I totally understand where you're coming from. But I think the bigger picture is that anyone, and if you go and look at the other communities that don't have their own PSA, you aren't going to be able to tell them, as these other communities have said, we want you to bring 3 ambulances here, we want you to have a response time of other 7 minutes. They're going to be happy to do that, but there's going to be a cost to the city to do those types of programs. So what has happened now is because Roseville and others don't own their license, they're stuck with what's out there. And this is what's one of the big controversies that's been going on. Take the city of Duluth and you take some other communities, and they're saying, we want that business. We want to have that EMS service in our community because for 2 reasons. One is that there are revenues to be gained, and you have to understand is that we are also paying a lot of the fund or the bills in the overall fire department through the revenues that we collect from the EMS service. So even though if you were to take the EMS service and I guess in your case, farm it out to someone else, we're still going to have to shift costs back into the general fund. The other issue comes into play. These services don't come in and put up their own buildings. If you go and look, is that from the vast majority of them, they come into a fire department and utilize their fire department. They utilize their bays, their heats, their lights. And in turn for that, they provide us with the ambulance service. And so there isn't a cost sharing that goes into play. And I know we're getting late and I don't want to belabor this, but I'll take one more case for instance. If you take the city of West St. Paul, Health East runs their operation there. And they're really saying is that we want to respond to some of these calls and we would like to charge and get some of those dollars. And they're saying is that, well, they're in the same boat we're going to be in. No matter who comes into Maplewood, 68% of the people all they're going to collect on is the Medicare rate. So they're going to look at their services and say, well, you know, we can only do this. But you take a look at it, and so West St. Paul says, well, we're going to continue to respond, but we want some of those dollars from you for responding. And the answer is, first of all, they don't have to give it to them, and number 2 is there's no dollars to give when you're only collecting that small amount of money.
How can we pay for anything out of revenues when we're losing millions of dollars in the fund? How can you equate it that we're actually paying for something? You know, John's going to answer this question.
You're allocating a portion of all the overhead expenses based on the size of that. So the more it loses, the more it eats of overhead that would otherwise be paid, you know, by the fire protection program, Michael's time on fixing laptops for ambulance operators and all kinds of stuff like that.
Mayor and Council, it clearly is literally an accounting shift. Remember, not only are we, and I tried to explain it in I think it's page 31. Understand, I mean, we're going to put $350,000 of levy money into the ambulance fund. But then the ambulance fund is going to pay $320,000 back to the general fund. Whoops, there went my mic. That didn't work on the visuals there. It was dramatic. That was the visuals. I thought you guys needed, I could see you slipping away until that visual got there. So anyway, but understand that those accounting shifts are there. And so, you know, over the years, the ambulance fund, unlike some other funds, have paid money to support the general fund. So we lived off that. And when you said in February, make these things sustainable, that's what we're doing. By making these shifts, we're making those things sustainable. But that doesn't mean that we're losing money. And so how we present that information needs to be clear. And so what we are talking about is using some money to make sure that that occurs and that we make that there. If we don't want to do that new levy, one item is simply to say, you know, instead of putting new levy money to the ambulance fund, don't pay any money at an administrative charge to the general fund. It means the general fund is going to be $320,000, and we better go find somewhere else to cut. And so it's a shifting of money. And so the more we get into these intricacies of how the budget works, the more you're going to understand that there's dollars moving from fund to fund to fund.
I would say the less I will understand. Mr. Lannis.
I don't know who peed in your Cheerios this morning, but you are ornery today, and I love it.
I'm ornery at budget time.
I love it. I mean, I don't know, but
I hope that term gets in the minutes.
So I do have with regards to what you were saying, I think I don't know how we got talking about the outsourcing of that particular service, because I think I sort of tongue-in-cheek said this to those guys who were sitting in the hallway. I mean, we could essentially do that with any one of our services that we offer as a city. I mean, I kind of was joking with these guys when they were sitting in the hallway, but literally, there are opportunities that I think, without being flippant about it, that we could certainly look at. And I really mean that. I mean, why couldn't we do that with any of the other things that we do and taking a look at outsourcing those services? And so I think it's a valid conversation. My question is, Mr. All, it seems like the majority of the summative information is really on the second to last slide. I don't know if you're, because of the interest of time, if you'd be willing to forego some of those individual ones, but if you wanted to look at that second to last one, when it talks about really the recommendations component of it.
Sure.
There are some substantial increases from 11 and 12, and so maybe I'll let you highlight those, but then I have a specific one, if that's all
Okay,
right.
I will get there very quickly. So we're going to move
Well,
through.
not quite as quickly as you thought.
All right.
Do you have more that you wanted to say, or? I'll hold it up. Okay. Proceed then.
Council, we'll get to the summary on this, but clearly the point, there's no expansion. Clearly, from our standpoint as staff, the critical decision is with this $350,000 plus the debt service. You add those two together, that's your levy increase. The rest of it is simply money shifting around. Okay? I do want to note this does put us on a recovery of 5 to 7 years. So I was told to hurry, and I will. The IT's no change, legislative's 850, parks no change, police department 179. Council, I do need to spend 1 second here. This is a change. We originally had this at 0 and said we were going to take a gamble to do the squad cars. We could still take that gamble, and that could be 0. Okay? So that's your option. The other item, Chief Tamala, in 12 seconds or less, how are we doing on the liaison revenue? 11, 10.
As of Friday afternoon, we have a verbal commitment from the school district that we will be funded at a level of $60,000 for the coming school year when we were in jeopardy of having none.
So council, you could take that 62 and make it 0. So there's a $60,000 cut. Remember, the force remains at the 2010 level of 53 sworn officers. Okay, I know I'm supposed to move quickly. Here we go. Public Works, 89, substantial reductions there. You heard from Mr. Thompson about that. Performance measurements are showing. Tartan has gone to 0. Taste of Maplewood, we're providing $20,000, although Karen's going to have a new report on that at some point in time. So the 2012 levy reductions. Council, understand these are the differences. In the general fund, these are your operating expenses. You told us to reduce expenses to operate. We are reducing expenses by 4.6%, our operating costs. The general fund will go from $12.98 million to $12.38 million, nearly $600,000 in operating cost reductions. Okay? Second line item, the ambulance fund then shows an increase from 0 up to $350,000. The MCC shows an increase from $340,000 up to $460,000. The rec program fund we talked about, $225,000 down to $200,000. The capital improvements fund from 0 up to $340,000 with all those shifts, and this puts $200,000 from the police department expansion into that category. The fire truck replacement fund from 0 up to $100,000. Park development remains at 0. Redevelopment fund at 0. Debt service from 3.95 up to 4.2 million, for a total levy 17.5 in 11 up to 18.04 in 12. So, council, just other talking about the last dates and the next part of the process. That is our management team staff presentation on our recommended budget at this point.
Okay, so I had one more thing on my list of things to talk about tonight, and so I'll do it quickly. So I talked about, I understand that we operate as a team, but I got to tell you that Mr. Kaneko does an excellent job of making sure that the council knows every time he does something to save us money. And that, I think, is a plus. I mean, we won awards. We've during the course of the year for the recreational programming thing. He's done, in my opinion, a heck of a job so far with the purchase of the Fish Creek area, and then let's see, what else are you doing? Oh, in reorganizing the community center to try to get us in that 5-year program. And so I know, yeah, Subway, first in the nation, Subway's gone into a recreational facility. And as I said before, I realize it's a team approach. It's not him doing it. But I certainly know what it is that he's doing and the efforts that he's making. I can't say the same for the other departments. I know that we have been making cuts and that we're going to be operating on lesser budgets, but, they're just, when's the last time that you actually looked at comparing the ambulance fund to an outsourced thing? I mean, within the last 10 years?
Your Honor, we look at it every couple of years to see where we compare with other services that are in the area. Two things that really come into play, I mean, and the fact is that over the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years, I should say, we've had we've had over $350,000 in grants that we've received from the ag. This year alone, we got a $150,000 grant to replace and put equipment into place in the EMS fund that we would have never been able to do. We reduced our medical direction by almost 38,000 down to 10,000, which Dr. Tangy was here and you talked to him about. We moved our sourcing of our EMS billing, which we were doing internally, to externally, which took us from 134,000 down to 50,000.
Okay, you can stop. You can stop now. Okay. And so.
There's just too many. They'd spend all their time.
Yes, right. And so we need I have 2 points. We need to do a better job of highlighting and communicating that. I know that we actually do some of that, but, and I'd be glad to write about it, but I need to have information to do that. The other thing is, and so this is kind of a different point of view, some of the things that are happening in the Parks Department and some of the things that we've won awards for have to do with consolidating or working with our neighbors in one way or the other. And so, again, it's easy to see what's been going on over there. And I understand that there's been conversations that you've had with other chiefs and whatnot. But I don't think that we really get back kind of a report. What I'd like is to know that, we've approached these other fire entities or police entities, maybe even citizen service entities, I'm not quite sure how that would work, and said, is there any way that we can cooperate together to reduce our services? And if they come back and say, no, we're not interested, well, at least we know that the offer was made. I would like to think that Maplewood would be a leader in going out in exploring what I see as the future way that government's going to have to operate. And we might be ahead of our time, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And so if, from my point of view, I would like to have every department explore in one way or the other what they could do with our surrounding neighbors or just with other entities that help us buy something cheaper or whatever. But then that we know about it. That, here's what we did. We went out and we proposed this, or we had a meeting with these people, and ultimately they weren't interested. Jim has mentioned a couple times that we tried to put together a deal with the school district to kind of get this survey thing all together, and the school districts pulled the plug. And so at least we know that there was an effort made. And so I think that's another thing that makes me hesitate a little bit when it comes to the budget. I want to pay for things that we've committed ourselves to. It's nothing like voting to do something, then not voting for the funding for it. But I want to feel that if I'm going to be spending more money than I really want to in some cases, that we have done everything that we can to cut our costs and to explore all options. So there's my last thing.
He's just good at blowing his own horn. Maybe that's what.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to get to that without being that direct. But.
Mayor and Council, in order to help us move along, some of the items that we talked about tonight, I'll throw out a suggestion. I know it's getting really late. If you want to turn to page 33 in your packet and write some numbers down. Again, We're setting the maximum levy. You can move money around in the future. If you would like to, I considered 4 items in here that we talked about that I threw hints at you during this presentation. Under the fire truck replacement levy, if you made that 50,000 instead of 100, if under the fund balance, you made the $100,000 zero and told us to use the 75,000 legal contingency, the squad cars, 84,000, you could put zero and make that out of fund balance, and the liaison revenue at zero. That reduces the levy by $296,000 to $17.74 million, and that's a 1.38% increase.
So was the squad car was one of them?
The squad cars were at zero. Gail says, no, don't do that.
All right, Gail, why shouldn't we do that?
I'm not, for sure, right now, I'm not sure we're going to have the funds for the carryover from this year to next year to be able to pay for them. And if this is a recurring thing that's happening in the police department budget, they're needing between 2 and 4 cars every year. If you take it out of the budget, then you got to figure out how you're going to fit it in the next year again, too. So if we're not sure we're going to have the carryover funds to pay for them next year, why not keep that item in the budget so we're sure they're budgeted for? And if we need to cut them next year, we can, if there's something else comes up. But to have to come up with it the next year.
Mayor and council, again, in using those items, and I respect certainly Gail on that, and that is not a sustainable thing. You can shift 50, the fire truck replacement fund really is the item that if you want to go to zero on that and put some of the money back into the squad cars, again, those are dollars that we're going to move around over the next 3-4 months and see where we are. Those are really the areas that we're talking about moving back and forth. So I understand, but it is getting late, and we do want you to make a decision this evening, get us some direction.
When do we actually have to set the maximum levy?
September 12th.
Not very far away. So we certainly won't know any more about that particular item by then than we do now.
No. Council, we do not have another meeting before September 12th, so certainly you can not decide tonight, but then we would bring this item back on your agenda for discussion on that night. You do have to adopt a resolution that evening.
Right, but I mean, tonight we're just going to presumably say, okay, here's some additional things that we'd like to cut, maybe what you've recommended, but we're not deciding till the 12th.
Correct. Your final decision is
But
on
we'd
the
have time
12th.
to scheme.
You do have time to scheme.
Kathy, do you have something?
I was just going to say about the cooperating with your neighbors thing. Sometimes, in some cases, some departments may be exploring, and it's just not a good idea to blab it to us until they've explored far enough for the blabbing to mean something. And first of all, because we might blab even if we're not supposed to, and maybe discussing it openly with us makes it seem like something we've assumed, and it's not a good idea. So I think there's a lot of that going on a lot of the time, and until it's ripe for us to be doing something significant about it, or it's going to make any real impact, they're not going to tell us, and that's fine with me.
I don't think I asked them any different.
Yeah,
I said if
actually
they say
you did.
no, tell us that, or tell us that you did something.
Yeah, but maybe they
So-
don't want you to say no.
John?
Well, other people have something to
So
say about
I
it.
thought I would jump into my thoughts on revisions. I don't know exactly what method we're going to use, if it was going to be put all a bunch of sheets together and average them or something, but
We're going to go through these individually, right?
for well, there are a couple things that I just want to highlight, and I don't know if anybody else agrees with me. Some of it was what Chuck brought up. So first of all, on the public safety levy issue, I agree that we need to start doing that. I would rather see us phase it in with a slightly smaller beginning, and so I would suggest a somewhat smaller number on that, like 250 to begin with. I would say I would like to see some money going into the fire truck replacement fund, because I'm concerned about just having it be zeroed out. And so whether it's 50 or 75, those are the kinds of numbers I'd be interested in. When it comes to the fund balance, I think maybe I'm okay with the idea of moving stuff from the legal contingency fund that Chuck suggested. Otherwise, I thought that was something that we could pare it down a bit with. And it sounds like we almost can bank on the liaison revenues for the police department. And it will be probably not until after we've set the levy that we're going to have anything firm on what the results were from the Taste of Maplewood, and so we'll have to defer that vote and any potential budget impact. But of course, since this is the preliminary levy, we can always adjust it further down as more data comes in, but we can't go the opposite direction. And so I would like to see the number, the percentage increase more like 2%. Perhaps not even as low as Chuck was suggesting. I'd be okay leaving the squad cars in until there was more visibility, for example. But I do think that I would rather see us phasing in some of the sustainable things on the medical thing. And there's a lot, we can have that debate for a very long time with all the ins and outs of that, but that's my first blush view on it.
Anybody have any comments on that? I would guess that I would agree with the 2% type of thing that John put out. You know, we don't want to set a maximum levy that is the bottom line because we're going to be going through the next few months and there's going to be stuff that's going to come up. Just like in the last couple of months when we've been doing this, the numbers change because there's new things to consider. And so I think that we want to make some adjustments, and I guess, you know, if Gail says we shouldn't be cutting the squad cars, we shouldn't be cutting the squad cars, so that'd be my approach. And John's ideas are fine with me. Quite frankly, Chuck's were fine with me, even if we took out the squad cars. But
Council, if the 2%, if that's the number, we wanted to get down in no specifics. If that's your number, I would note that Mr. Nephew's suggestions, if I totaled them up, were more than what I suggested. So they were $312,000. I suggested $296,000. So if you want to take my suggestions or Mr. Nephew's suggestions, either one, and then add the squad cars back in there, we've got more than enough to bring it back to you. We'll be under the 2% with our final recommendation.
well, I would guess, and I would guess that for setting the maximum levy, that as John said, I would rather be up around 2%. And then, you know, with you realizing that we want to keep looking and figuring it out, but with the the realization that stuff might happen. And we, you know, want to have the opportunity to fund the Taste of Maplewood if we decide we want to fund it. And so we can't set it at the bottom, at least not the maximum. Anybody disagree with that approach? Well, you guys don't want us to do that. Okay. And their lights are on. Jim?
I would be in favor of setting the maximum levy at about 3.5%, shooting for a 2% goal. But beyond that, but because I think there are some things that are still unknown, we're still trying to figure out. And I think if we're shooting for that range, that we can certainly pare down and go towards the 2%. I know you're never going to vote for anything at about 3%. We heard that loud and clear, Cheerios. But
That's his new nickname.
But
I like
we can't.
I got to get him a dish.
We can't. We have to have a little bit of room. I mean, I understand where we're trying to be. I believe we should be at 2%, but there are some things that are a little unclear for me still. So I think we could. That would be mine. I don't know where you're at, Kathy. But.
Kathy?
Not wanting to tarnish my reputation as that spendthrift woman on the council, I'm still fine with 3.
John?
I just do want to add, again, since we had so much fun talking about market value homestead credit, that when we think about these numbers, for example, Jim, if we said we should go with 3.5, that's about like as though we were going to 5.5 in terms of the impact on property tax payers. And that's one of the reasons I think that, well, anyway. So I want to make sure that we keep that in mind because the numbers sound lower than, they look smaller than, it's like those mirrors. You can't trust the scale.
Marv, where you at?
I like John's advice.
Okay. So,
That looked
Oh,
like,
my God.
that looked like it hurt, didn't it?
My hair kind of went
I think that's the best we're going to be able to do. You've got a poll that you can work with and decide how that works for you. All right, is anything else? All right, we're adjourned at 9 o'clock. And I was going to note one thing, or two things. Mr. Lannis arrived at 5:30 for the record. And then also, you may remember that on September 11th at 12 noon, that we will do everything that we can to have that minute of reflection having to do with the September 11th attacks and the 10-year anniversary thereof. And so try to put that on your calendars, and when you hear the siren or the bells ring at churches or whatever at noon, take that minute to reflect on the past. We're adjourned.
That was a short.
They keep using energy. I'd always looked at that whole on-off issue as an either-or thing. In an often irrational world, those kinds of absolutes are comforting. That's when I got one of these, a Power Strip. One button virtually unplugs my precious yet energy-sucking lifestyle amenities. And once again, I live in a rational universe where off absolutely means off.